those jobs here in Georgia. And I know the chairman feels the same way. We've had those discussions, and I'll let him make a few comments, and then if you'd like, you can introduce the speakers, if you would.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The process of discussion about driverless vehicles is not a new one nationwide. It's been going on for some time now. And here in Georgia, there was really, last session, the awareness level started to rise some. Really leaving last session into last May, a number of important partners from private industry were having the conversation. We're doing some forums about where unmanned technology is, both UAVs on the aviation side, surface cars, driverless cars, driverless logistics systems on the ground side. And last May, we really started, in fact, formally more of a formal relationship with Georgia Tech Research Institute in starting some meetings talking about where does Georgia law need to be to put us on the leading edge. So often there's a tendency to copycat what other states do, and sometimes other states are right where you would want to be. Other times we'll find early adopting states that are innovation-minded sometimes put into their law things that become impediments long-term to real innovation and real breakthrough. And we had some folks from industry approach us and say, Nevada, California, Texas, they've taken action on the driverless car issue in particular. But we were actually approached by private industry to say, hey, we really think Georgia, with some of the partnerships here from our research universities and the private sector, really can be a leader. But let's not, from a driverless car perspective in particular, let's not copy what other states have done. There are actually some things in other state laws that were early adopters that we think will be not conducive to real innovation. So that really led a process through the summer and fall and really right up to session with our first speaker, Mr. Hildebrand from Georgia Tech, to look ahead and think, what would driverless vehicle legislation 2.0 really look like? Where do we really want to be to allow the marketplace to move in and provide true breakthrough technologies when the time comes and when the technology is really there to deliver it? And that's really been our goal. Not to copycat other states, but to really leap ahead and learn from their experience and what the real cutting edge is in industry. And it was really on that basis that Chairman Beach and I were talking and spoken with a number of other members. This is the first of, I think, a number of meetings that will happen over the next several months around this topic, and I just appreciate Chairman Beach leaping ahead and scheduling this for us so we can do a joint hearing and begin the process of informing ourselves on where the state of technology is and where the where legislative action might be best advised. So with that, in particular, I'd like to introduce Mr. Terry Hildebrand from Georgia Tech. I'd like to thank the whole Georgia Tech team. They've accommodated a number of meetings. There's other team members with Terry that have been involved through the process, but if you would join us, Mr. Hildebrand's got about a 30-minute presentation, and as is the case on the subject matter, we'll have plenty of time for lots of questions, both from members of the panel and perhaps even some comments from members of the audience if necessary. Mr. Hildebrand.
Chairman Beach, Chairman Setzler, and members of the House and Senate Science and Technology Committee, thank you very much for this invitation. We look forward to presenting some more information to you about self-driving vehicles. What I would like to do first, very quickly, is just introduce my teammates. That we have Mr. Isaac Asher, who is actually a graduate student at Georgia Tech. He's been working with us on the unmanned vehicles for approximately a year and a half or so. And Mr. Asher is a University of Georgia graduate, but well, it's hard to say, but he is currently enrolled at Georgia Tech, getting a master's degree, as well as enrolled at Georgia State, yes, pursuing a JD. So he's doing both of those at the same time. Not present is Ms. Moon Kim. She's a research associate at GTRI, and she's been working with us as well. Her focus is on policy and the nexus of policy and technology. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today because she's pursuing her second master's degree. She has one master's degree in international policy and is now pursuing another policy related degree. So again, thank you very much for allowing us to be here, and we hope to be able to put some interesting ideas out for your consideration. This will be an information type briefing, and what we hope to cover during this presentation, first of all, is to begin with some terminology and determining just what we talk about when we talk about self-driving vehicles, as well as the state of the technology. As I mentioned to some earlier, if you were watching the Super Bowl, which I'm sure not many of you were last night, but the Mercedes commercial demonstrated one of the technologies that can be integrated into self-driving cars, and that was the adaptive emergency braking system, where the driver was blinded by light. The car detected that there was some obstacle in the road, and it actually stopped the car for him. And so after talking about some of the current technology, some of the benefits that we may realize from that technology, as well as what some of the other states, Isaac's going to talk about what some of the other states have done to date, and then just put up for some discussion some considerations for Georgia. So to begin with, just to understand a little bit about the terminology, we're focusing today on that term self-driving vehicle. When we talk about autonomous vehicles, sometimes the autonomy means to us that you can turn the vehicle loose and it goes on its own, and you direct it someplace and goes without a driver. Whereas a self-driving vehicle is one that can do that, but more than likely has a person in it that can take control of the vehicle in case of some sort of emergency. Now, one of the reasons we've decided we would like to kind of bracket these ways is because self-driving vehicle is what we would term rather near term, because we can find technologies much like what was demonstrated last night in a commercial that would be available and would be able to alert drivers, and they could take control of the car. Whereas the autonomous vehicle is something where it drives itself pretty much, and you don't have to have someone there to take control of the car. So just try to bound the areas just a little bit with that. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration has come out with some formal definitions of automation, and there are 5 levels. Level 0 is where the driver's in complete control of the vehicle. And notice, with the exception of, I think, level 4 down there, the word control is in each one of these definitions. So even back when I was growing up, some of the cars then were just at level 0, because if you take a look at a very wide definition of automation, you could claim that automatic drive, automatic transmission could in fact be taking over the function of changing gears for a driver. And function specific for level 1, that's a good example of that is your cruise control. You get to a certain speed, you set the cruise control, but if you don't pay attention, your car will run over somebody, run over something, or whatever. It may alert you that you, in fact, are coming upon somebody, but you have to take control of the vehicle in order to change the speed. Under level 2, the adaptive cruise control works with the braking system. Much like, again, what we saw, some sensor says that there is an obstacle in the road, and it automatically brakes for you without having any intervention by the driver. And Isaac will mention too here in a few moments about the autonomous emergency braking system, which is in Europe. And at level 3, you have the speed control, the braking systems, of proximity, monitoring, steering, and those things, which then do much more. Probably 80 to 90% of what a driver does today is what you would see at the level 3 level there. And level 4 is completely turn it loose. You set the car, this is where I want to go, and it takes you there. So these just give you some ideas, because as you hear about the various aspects of self-driving car, and they use the word interchangeably, autonomous car, self-driving car, you will have some understanding that there are various levels at which we go to. So this gives you an idea of some of the manufacturers today that are working on the various components of self-driving vehicles. And in the lower left-hand corner, we gave you some examples there. We're beginning to see, as I said, a number of these things that are being advertised on TV today. Nissan has issued actually a press release saying that they plan to have a self-driving car commercially available in the year 2020. So within about 6 years, Nissan plans to have something available for the general public. This is just it's not an eye test, but just to give you some idea of the various technologies that are available today, where they're available. So it goes from the cruise control, it goes to night vision, adaptive light control, traffic sign recognition, and things of that sort are already available, but not in an integrated fashion such that it controls the car or one sensor alerts another sensor that something has to be done. But all of these technologies are available in some form on vehicles today, just not integrated to the point where we would call them a self-driving car with the 80 to 90% of functionality. So in Spain, Volvo had did a little demonstration of what they called platooning, and in this case, and I'm going to show you just a little quick video on this. But we had, or Volvo had a truck that was actually with a professional driver in it, driving along the Autobahn, followed by another truck and about 3 or 4 Volvo cars. And those cars were communicating wirelessly, so they maintained the same distance, they maintained the same speed. When the professional driver moved or changed lanes, they changed lanes with him. And so they did everything, they mimicked that professional driver's patterns. And this is something that has been integrated into these cars. Now, let's all hold our breath and make sure this works correctly. Okay. I have to plug in the sound system. Okay.
Request for joining.
Platoon request accepted. Please release the vehicle pedals. Please release the steering wheel.
So the lady asked to join the platoon, and then she was authorized to do so, and now she's part of that small convoy that's
I think it's
along.
really impressive. I think we spent the last 2.5 years developing a demonstrator, and to be able to get that out onto the public highway and show it will actually work is really, really impressive. I'm very pleased.
Convenient, since I can do something else than the actual driving. Safe, since the system will take care of the driving, it will eliminate the human errors. And then fuel efficient, since we use a minor gap size between the vehicles, we will reduce air drag and thereby fuel consumption.
This is the lead driver here.
It's quite fun to see.
That's not unlike I-20 when I come in and work in the morning.
They're quite surprised seeing me not driving the car but reading a magazine. They will bend back and see, is she actually not driving?
I think it gets easier as time progresses and people become more familiar with the technology and they accept it more. I think as generations progress, they become more familiar with it and more accepting of it. My son, he's asking me questions about this. He wants to see it on the roads now.
Maintaining the distance and the speed.
Today we had slopes, we had winds, it was quite windy, a lot of other traffic, and it was great to see that the system could handle it. So very, very, very positive experience.
So now they're exiting the highway. 120 miles on an Autobahn in Spain. So that gives you an idea of the types of things that we're talking about, in which those self-driving cars were able to maintain distance, they were able to save fuel, the drivers were able to do what they needed to do and feel safe about it. The cars communicating with each other as they went along.
Terry, could you talk about some of the other videos that are out there? I was chiding about not bringing the Google car one, the one in particular about the blind gentleman.
Right. Chairman Setzler's already ribbed me a little bit about this one. There is one video on YouTube in which a legally blind gentleman gets into his car and he drives to Taco Bell or the donut shop using the Google car. And of course he's using his cane and he's got his glasses on. He goes in and buys something, then comes back out and gets in the car and it drives him back home, which I think kind of bothered a lot of people that were in the parking lot watching him as he was doing this. But he was able, using that Google technology, to do this totally independent without any assistance from anyone else. So I should have brought that. I apologize, sir, for
it's
not
all
bringing
good.
that one.
It's a good enough story you can tell. Chair recognizes Representative Turner.
I just have a quick question. That's pretty impressive, but what happens if the lead driver crashes?
Well, I guess you have the vehicle communications and can continuously monitor what he's doing as well. But that, obviously, if he falls asleep or crashes, then you may have some difficulties. Now, at any point in time, any of those vehicles can opt out of that convoy. All you have to do is just basically pull out, and so you don't have to. So, for example, your exit comes up, and you decide you don't want to follow anymore. You just take control of the vehicle and move it off to the exit ramp. So it's not as if you can't gain back control of the vehicle. But certainly that's a safety issue that needs to be or should be addressed, yes.
Any more questions at this point?
Okay. All right. So that gives you some idea about what we're talking about from a technology perspective of being able to do. And what we want to talk about for a little bit are some of the benefits that we can realize through the implementation. Notice that they did say that you could save on fuel, and of course that impacts the environment and things of that sort from that platooning or convoying type things. But there's also some other great benefits to this. So according to experts, about 90% of all the vehicle crashes are caused by driver error. And if you watch the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration statistics, you can see that out of the about 32,300 some folks that were killed in 2011 in automobile accidents, 1,223 were here in the state of Georgia, placing us in the top 10 with the highest number of fatalities. And we also see that there's a great financial loss of $10.83 billion, and I want to make sure that that's not just in vehicle. That also includes lost productivity, medical costs, and things of that sort as a result of accidents, not just simply vehicle repair. But by reducing traffic accidents by 90%, which is what's projected by using the self-driving technology, we can have about 1,100 fewer fatalities in the state of Georgia each year, as well as reducing the cost for those. Now, not to mislead anyone, we want to make sure that putting 5 or 10 self-driving cars out on the highway is not going to reduce fatalities by 90%, okay? So what we're looking at here is we're assuming probably an 80 to 90% market penetration. So it's a few years away, but we're driving in the right direction when we start using this technology. The benefits on congestion, again, some projections from the Texas Transportation Institute of what we will be experiencing in 2020 if we continued as we go along. And here is also where you see the expected effective capacity of our highways. So if we have about 1% penetration with self-driving vehicles in the marketplace, we'll see I'm sorry, 10%. We'll see about a 1% increase in lane effectiveness. So you'll be able to get more cars on the highway because now they are actually a little bit closer together and being able to be controlled by each other. And so at 50% market penetration, about 21% of capacity will be increased. So in essence, you're going to be saving some money with regard to infrastructure and building additional highways as the market penetration increases.
The adaptive cruise control is just one component of a self-driving vehicle. So you're already seeing potential reductions when using just one technology that could be integrated into a complete system of self-driving.
That's correct. Thanks, Isaac. Yeah. Excuse me. Another benefit we'll see in efficiency and cost. Again, we're looking at probably a 90% market penetration rate, but an increase in lane capacity about 500%. So now cars are leaving the highway. They're all leaving together. They're spaced appropriately. We also see that probably that may be a better option than high-speed trains, as one expert puts it, simply because now you can have, with a fully autonomous car or autonomous vehicles, you can have vehicles coming to your front door to pick you up and deliver you, rather than having to travel to either train stations, bus stations, and things of that sort. So there's that efficiency as well in it. And from an economic standpoint, the projection is that this is going to be about a $240 billion industry, which is 3 times that of the cloud computing industry today. And the number of cars are about 8,000 sold in 2020 will go up to about 95 million in 2035. So that gives you some idea about some of the economic growth and safety. I'm going to turn this over to Isaac now. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the analysis that he did on some of the state laws that are passed. There's actually 4 states now, but we're going to cover that and do an analysis over on that. Isaac?
Chairman Setzler, Chairman Beach Committee members. So what we see right here is, when we started looking at some of the benefits and the technology itself, we noticed that there are quite a few companies out there already spending money in research and development. We know Google's spending money. We don't know how much, but we were able to find some estimates. For example, Continental had $130 million. They happen to have a license to test in Nevada. They are also, from my understanding of some reports, were somewhat instrumental in Michigan's law that just passed right after Christmas. Then we also have Mobileye, another company, spending $400 million, and then Intel's put $100 million in a connected car fund. So there's money out there being spent in research and development on this, and these companies like Continental, like Google, are out testing it in the states that have happened to pass some sort of legislation, and they happen to play a role in the legislative process so far. And so that kind of answers this question of, are states actively trying to capture the benefits of the technology through legislation? And from what we've seen, that is somewhat of a yes. However, it's 30 bills have been introduced on this, and only 9 bills have passed, but those 9 bills represent 4 states in the District of Columbia. And as you can see, the most recent one is, well, I don't know if you can see that, but the Michigan was right after Christmas break, or right after Christmas. And so what I did in the research is I started looking at the legislation, and I kind of broke it down as you started to see there's kind of a theme throughout the legislation that kind of answers what's the intent of the bill, how they define autonomous vehicles, what the autonomous technology is, and it's pretty consistent throughout in this respect on these questions. But then you start getting into who may operate, what are the requirements on testing, and what are the requirements on operation. And what a lot of these bills are is they're focusing mainly on the testing side, and not so much the future commercial viability of the vehicle. And so you have specially endorsed licenses, but some say just any person with a driver's license, though they're still referring to a company coming in and testing it on their roads. And then they have the operations, the requirements on operations, like it needs to be equipped with specific technologies that warn the driver or has a manual override, and also be in compliance with all the laws in the state. And then there's some other mechanisms, and other requirements. So some states have started looking at, well, what if there is a crash? Well, we want this to collect some data to give us an information on what was happening prior to the crash, and that's something that is a concern. You start collecting data. It's something we have to look at as far as going forward if legislation is ultimately is what's going to come. And then there's also insurance requirements. So in order for these people to test on the roads, I don't know if they can go out to a regular insurance and get the insurance. They have to put up $5 million in surety bonds and potentially more, depending on the number of vehicles they're testing on the road. Whereas you can see in D.C. they didn't quite address that, which comes to somewhat of the other concern when you have the standards of liability and what are the next steps. So we start talking about the standards of liability, and they're exempting the original manufacturers from third-party conversions, but now you're starting to see Nissan, Tesla, and some of these other manufacturers who are producing this or claiming to be producing this in-house. Well, how's the liability going to work? How do you structure that in a way that you can both get people to come in and test, but also have your citizens feel safe with this technology on the road? And what we noticed is, so a lot of these send off to a Department of Motor Vehicles or some other state department to send back a report, and the time frame is typically about 2 years after the bill's passed. So what you see here is the Nevada bill. The very first one was in 2011. Well, they had to come back and amend it in 2013 based off a report they got from the Department of Motor Vehicles in 2012, which is why there's an NA there. But so the other ones, like Michigan, has 2016. So what you're seeing is, a lot of these states have passed a preliminary law that allows this testing. They've sent it off for, more study. So there's still time as far as, you say, oh, these are the first states, they're ahead of the curve, but really they're still sitting back there kind of figuring out exactly what all the issues are with self-driving vehicles, and then coming back and potentially at some point amending the original law or passing another law based off those reports they're going to get back. So in addition to looking within the U.S., we also want to see what's Europe doing. And so from 2014 onward, they're saying that all new cars have to have autonomous emergency braking. And one of the studies they commissioned recognized that autonomous emergency braking reduced accidents by 27% and also gave a significant decrease in congestion. And just this little explanation of how it's using lasers and radar and cameras and videos to kind of get a sense of what's going on, and then relaying that back within the car and allowing it to brake autonomously. And another thing we found kind of recently is that Volvo entered into a partnership with Gothenburg, Sweden, that by 2017 they're going to have a trial run of self-driving vehicles within the city. And Volvo's projection is that they're going to distribute 100 cars throughout the city, and they're going to have it span every type of roadway, and they're going to be out there driving the cars by 2017. And so,
Isaac, and just for clarification, their goal is to have those cars out. Could you describe the circumstances they're?
Yeah, so it's I mean, it's a relatively new report, but my understanding of it is that they're going to have a car in the city center. They're going to have cars going out on the interstate, and they're distributing them to 100 individuals. I don't know exactly how they're going to choose the individuals, and they're going to have them, and so they're going to kind of get feedback on that to see how well the car's operating within all of these different environments that the city has to offer, while also getting Gothenburg on the map as having these cars in there first going. So it should be interesting to see as Volvo, over the next few years as they start getting those cars ready to go on the road. As of right now, they have one that can operate as a self-driving in under 30-mile-an-hour conditions, which would typically be in like a city-type setting. So when we started doing, the research, we noticed, and we held a symposium and kind of reached out to some people, and we realized, there's some definite economic development potential and workforce potential in the state of Georgia with its technology companies and with its research institutes. And so, we started seeing that, there's some legislation that's been passed, but there's definitely time to still be, in this 2.0 to 3.0 phase if we give it a little time to look and figure out exactly, the environment that we're going to be operating this self-driving vehicle in, because it's more than just the vehicle. And I know, Terry.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the policy, but one of the things, too, we must consider as we employ self-driving vehicles is the ecosystem. What about those things outside the vehicle itself? Quite a bit of research is being done on the vehicle. But when you take a look at that vehicle moving in and about an environment such as a small city, what about the infrastructure? How about the traffic lights and the guardrails and the crossings? How does that car communicate with those particular pieces of infrastructure? And so that's of interest to us as well, aside from the car itself. And we also consider in that the information technology. Consider this is that now this car is receiving quite a bit of data coming from multiple sources and multiple formats. I mean, you got infrared, you got camera, you got all these sorts of different sensors, and it's all coming together inside the car. So now what you really have is an issue with the term today is big data. How do you sort through that in real time to give the driver a real-time status that someone is in the walkway, or is this obstruction a bush, or is it a block? I mean, that might mean a lot to some folks. And traffic lights. If the traffic light changes and your car doesn't get that in time, will it stop or will it continue to go on through the intersection when another car is on the way? So infrastructure and the information technology piece needs to be considered as well. And when we look at test and evaluation, today your car is tested by the manufacturer, right? I mean, GM does their testing and things of that sort. So now we have new technologies being added, and it's asking you for a lot of trust, because now you're going to say, okay, I'm going here and I'm going to turn loose and I'm going to be reading my iPad or newspaper or whatever. I trust you. So maybe there's a requirement here or a need for third-party type of test and evaluation that says the sensor does work properly, it does do it, but integrated into the car, how well does it do? How well does the car, the computers in the car handle that data itself and provide it back to the driver in time. And of course, we're all concerned about the security and privacy issues. That goes back to the trust issues. But so as we read through our literature, we find that some have said, well, maybe what we do now is we tax people based upon the number of miles driven instead of by gallon of gasoline. That's just as an example what we do. Well, okay, that's fine. Can you tell me where I've driven? And if you listen to upper echelon of Ford Motor Company, yes, we can. Okay. So now all of a sudden it becomes a real privacy issue that not only do you know how many miles I've driven, but you know where I've been. And so those are of concern from a privacy issue. And the other side is so far I guess maybe drivers today haven't been really hacked. They've been hacked off maybe, but they haven't been hacked in the sense of cyber technology, and so they've actually come through some cars and been able to penetrate the car computer system, their network inside the car through mundane things such as their radio, their tire pressure gauges, and things of that sort. So all of that must be secured to increase the trust in this technology. And then we come to the education piece. So we got brand new technology. We got how do we train people? Maybe there's an opportunity for high schools. You have driver education or something of that sort. How do we handle this new technology called self-driving car? At the tech schools, how do you basically repair and work on this four-wheel computer, basically, is what we're looking at. So we're not doing exactly the same thing. So tech schools are going to have to take on some training with regard to how to repair the vehicles. And at a four-year college and research, much like Isaac studying city planning, there's obviously some issues with city planning, the legal aspects and things of that sort. So education is going to be impacted about this as well. So when we first, yes, sir.
You do have one question. Is that Representative Braddock or Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
It is now.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's exactly right. Those are some of the very real research issues. So maybe the maps are there. It doesn't necessarily depict that yesterday this was one way that way, today it's one way this way. So the infrastructure has to be the one that's communicating that. One of the other examples, which I didn't give, is that you now run upon a construction site. And so here's this big orange diamond out there that says we're mowing grass or whatnot, and your car's going along at 60 miles an hour, whatever the speed limit is. How does it know to slow down? Well, that infrastructure has to be there because this is not something that's there every day. It has to be able to say, today you're going 35 miles an hour. But absolutely, so that's why the infrastructure has to be considered as well as just the car, because the car doesn't know that unless something's there to tell him that. Good question. So another one? I'm sorry.
Yes,
sir.
A couple of questions that we haven't, at least I missed. Number one is we're talking about predictive driving. You were talking about on the interstate and so on, but you're going down the road and all of a sudden somebody has a blowout in front of you and a tire comes.
Right.
Has that been taken into consideration of a reactive to the car? Because now as a driver,
right,
we've trained that. The other is, and we just came through that this week, what do we do with weather? Is there a lockout on the car so someone doesn't get in their car and all of a sudden they take off down the road and it's sunny here and then 15 miles up the road all of a sudden it's, we've got
right.
4 inches of downpour coming in and that car's trying to react to that.
Okay. So with respect to the impact of a tire blowout and all of a sudden a car skidding or the car, so that is real time. You've got camera systems, radar systems, and things of that sort, which will supposedly alert the driver or take evasive action depending upon how integrated the system is into the vehicle itself. Now, one of the things we're researching is this from a human factor standpoint. Today, much like your some features, you may just get a driver's alert. It says, something's happening here. You need to be aware of that. Well, if you're absorbed in the AJC and all of a sudden you look up and here comes a tire at you, you're probably in bad shape. But if you have a vehicle that can actually see that and then take some evasive action, and this is where we talk about connected cars. I know there's a car to my right, but there's an empty lane to my left. The car will veer to the left. So it's the connected technologies, much like what you saw on the Volvo, that's going to make that happen. And so each of the cars are talking to each other and saying, I'm here, you're there. Let's not rub fenders and things of that sort. So it's a while down the road. I'm not telling you that we're going to do that tomorrow, but
what about a lockout feature on it? Somewhere to lock out as far as...
Well, you can always not or choose not to go in automated side.
I mean an automatic lockout. I'm saying if someone gets in their car, they take off up the interstate. Sure. I mean, clearly we shouldn't have 1 million people that got out on the roads, right? But we did, so.
Well, maybe I can page forward. We anticipated a question similar to this. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go through real quick here. And so how could self-driving cars help last week? Is that kind of a fair question there that you may be looking for the answer? So to begin with, we could have ad hoc carpooling, which says, I'm not wanting to drive in, but I need to go in. Here I am, and I'm going to this place here. So smart cars can be directed to go pick him up, or even if there's people willing to do that, to come by and pick you up. So what you're aiming for there is a reduction in the number of cars on the vehicle. Same thing when you're going the other way. I'm not willing to drive as anybody going this way. So you're trying to reduce the number of vehicles on there. The cooperative adaptive cruise control keeps people moving at the same speed. One of the researchers that from out in California was looking at what is called essentially sag time. As a truck goes up a hill, people slow down, and all of a sudden it speeds up, and now you've got a wider gap, and people speed up to catch up with that truck or car. And so through the use of the proximity and platooning type techniques, they all maintain the same distance, so you don't see that sag or that lag in time. Everybody stays at the same distance. The vehicle-to-vehicle communications, which I mentioned, and the vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, which we've talked about a little bit, all of those would have helped with regard to maintaining the proper distance. And when you find some of the vehicle-to-infrastructure, or I'm sorry, the vehicle-to-communications, so if my car is running into a black ice spot, rather than you hearing it on the radio, 5 or 10 cars in front of me transmits back through that platoon or through those cars that are around it that, in fact, I've hit a black ice spot, you need to maybe get off the road. At the same time, the infrastructure is reporting to it that this exit's not open, you need to go find some other exit. So all this from a connected vehicle and infrastructure perspective is what we're aiming for. And again, not next week, but down the line, that's what we're progressing toward. We answer our question? No? Pardon?
I think so.
Okay.
Again, we've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
If you want to wrap up your presentation with some high points, and we'll have some more questions.
So one of the things that well, we see here resources are available. We certainly have the legislature and federal agencies, as well as the university system for researchers, as well as industry that could participate in all this. And we see all of these as major stakeholders in a self-driving vehicle technology. And so just for consideration, you may take a look at these 3 things. We talked about passing legislation now, which is as Isaac pointed out, might not be as comprehensive and as allowing for changes as what you would like to do. There may be some official statement that effectively says we're open for autonomous vehicle or self-driving vehicle business. We're looking for that. But you could also combine that with doing a study, because just as you've seen here, I mean, I certainly don't pretend to know all these answers. There's a lot of things that need to be looked into and understood so that we can pass effective legislation. And one of the major things, I think, is that legislation is not passed that prohibits or limits in some extent the evolution of the technology. And at a Transportation Research Board meeting a couple of weeks ago in D.C., one of the legal counsels up there suggested that maybe we ought to consider establishing standards. Once your car meets these standards, then it can be tested on the highways. And once it meets these standards, then it can be driven on the highway and these standards. So you base it upon standards rather than a year or two or something of that sort. So once it passes those standards, then you know that it's safe to operate. So those are just three things we've put out there that we think that you might want to consider there. So that does conclude our presentation, and again, I thank you very much for your time and interest in this particular subject, and we'll be glad to take any questions.
Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for bringing this stuff here today. So 2 quick questions. One, so what you're saying is right now there's no legislative policy that's blocking continued research and implementation of autonomous vehicles here in Georgia.
That's correct.
Excellent. Secondly, is more of an observation. I did a lot of work in machine vision research in the late 2000s, and it's unbelievable just in the past 5 years how well the technology has come out. I don't think people realize how close this technology actually is to being out there in the real world where everybody sees it. Here's my prediction. Your biggest problem with this technology is going to be people are emotional, and you're going to reduce accidents by 90%. When the little 6-year-old cute little girl gets killed by the computer that's driving and it's on the TV, and the parents are there, it's going to be really tough. It's going to be an emotional thing, but we're going to have to battle through it because we're still going to save lives and save tons of money. So thank you all for working on this.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Senator Carter.
Thank you. My apologies for being a little bit late, but thank you very much for being here. Well, one question that I have about this technology, I think I see it, but sort of there are way stations along the way. I mean, there is a path to arriving at a fully automatic car, and so far as I can tell from watching TV and seeing people who the car stops automatically before it hits the little kid with his little truck. I mean, we're going there now, yes, right? Yes, sir. And so there is sort of a gradual path. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And is there anything that we can do? What we would do as policymakers is just accelerate that path or remove obstacles. Is that right? Or we would just stay the heck out of the way.
I think a little bit tricky situation here. So what we don't want to do is, in the case of some states that have already passed some legislation, there are 4 states that have passed that. We don't want to pass a legislation which in some way constrains or prohibits or inhibits further out. So we want to pass smart, well-informed legislation. And in order to do that, you've heard all these issues just here. We need to do, or at least what we would say, is some sort of study, identify those issues, and establish some standards. Say, we in the state of Georgia would like for you to come here and test your vehicles, but in order to get on the road, you need to be able to do this. You need to be able to do that to actually drive them, or that sort of thing. So we do need that legislation to be able to do that, because that will attract the industry this way, showing that we are in fact friendly to that notion.
And Senator Carter, some of the discussion we had very briefly before the beginning of the presentation was some of the work before session, and some of that work was, rather than being an early adopter, where to make yourself comfortable today with today's technological constraints, you really handcuff yourself in a way that you can't undo 10 years down the road, versus what Mr. Hildebrand was talking about. If you anticipate where things will be, set certain performance criteria, and when the technology's here and you put up a surety bond So you've got you're insured. You've got you're a responsible agent to put some things on the road. When you've got the technology and you're willing to take full tort responsibility for everything that happens downstream, then innovators who've got the technology can put that out there on the road and not have legislative roadblocks. That's really, I think, the trick here, is figuring out how you do that. Because I think the goal would be if we can get to that place, the technology emerges, it can come on out without us having to act to let it. It's almost a permissive environment versus a restrictive environment.
Absolutely.
May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Just my one comment would just be that we want to be sure. And by the way, this microphone's working very well. Maybe I'm just louder than my colleague here. I don't think that's true. One thing that I would just want to be careful of doing anything in advance, and I think what you've just described is perfect to my sort of untrained ear right now, but is to try to pick winners and losers in the technology. I mean, that's the worst case scenario, because then we're incentivizing Betamax or VHS, and you end up with the wrong one. That's the one thing I would want to avoid, and I would assume that folks want to avoid that up there as well.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, and there's a lot of work being done in this area, and some of them are going to lead to Betamax, unfortunately. And so we want to be able to look at this over a period of, short period of time, but certainly to be able to see which way it's going. There's an issue between National Highway Safety Transportation Administration and Google, whether you use a wireless technology, or do you actually use satellite GPS systems and things of that sort. So those are issues that we need to be able to look at more.
I trust Google more.
I will say personally, I think the sense of the intelligence being in the car versus the intelligence being in the infrastructure is something that gives us flexibility. That's in my studies, I've seen that. I'll say a couple things and take some questions, and I'll let Chairman Beach certainly wrap us up. One of the things that we've seen in this process is kind of that vision of implementation for paratransit. Thinking down the road, the idea that where we want to be is, I would suggest, is that when a senior citizen sets up a doctor's appointment, can you schedule the car to come pick you up and take you to the doctor in 2 weeks? Is that sort of having that as our waypoint on the horizon? So, number of very, very exciting things. I think we've got a sense of legislatively taking it slow, but being very intent in digging into the details.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
So, well, again, I appreciate your time. Are there any further questions? I know Chairman Beach is going to close us out. Hearing none, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody in the audience have any comments, questions, thoughts? Well, again, thank you all very much. I got to tell you, this is exciting. It's innovative. As Representative Dudgeon said, that he was in the business of technology, and it's come a long way since, what year did you say, 2000? Since the late 2000s. Things are changing.
Yes, sir.
And we've got to be able to adapt and make sure that we're on the cutting edge, as I always say. So we're excited. We want to do it right. And I want to thank Chairman Setzler for having this joint meeting, because I think that's important too for both the House and the Senate on big issues like this. And you think about it, 2020 is not far away. I mean, these could be on the dealer showroom floor by 2020.
That's right.
That's right around the corner. So we better be prepared. And but again, I want to thank Dean and Casey and Isaac and Mr. Hildebrand. Thank you for coming. And if there's no other further questions, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.